Codes and the nature of the firm. One very compelling and underappreciated aspect of the Internet is how it has greatly expanded the potential to build platforms not just in the technology business, but in any industry. Companies have always built networks, but historically those networks were internal and designed to reduce costs. In this way, they followed the tenets of University of Chicago economist and Nobel laureate Ronald Coase, who argued that it often makes sense for firms to do things internally rather than externally, because the transaction costs of finding vendors, negotiating contracts, and making sure the work gets done right are high. As Coase put it, a firm will tend to expand until the costs of organizing an extra transaction within the firm become equal to the costs of carrying out the same transaction by means of an exchange on the open market, or the costs of organizing in another firm. Many smart 20th century companies ran the numbers and found that for much of what they wanted to get done, Coase was right. The internal management costs were lower than the transaction costs of outsourcing. This led them to do as much as they could within the organization, and when they did go outside their four walls, they worked with a small group of tightly controlled partners. So the 20th century was dominated by corporations that were large hierarchies, or, at their most expansive, closed networks. Today, Coase's framework still holds true, but it leads to radically different outcomes than it did in much of the 20th century. Rather than growing the biggest possible closed networks, companies are outsourcing more functions and working with a bigger and more diverse network of partners. Why? Don Tapscott put it well in Wikinomics when he wrote that the Internet has caused transaction costs to plunge so steeply that it has become much more useful to read Coase's law, in effect, backward. Nowadays, firms should shrink until the cost of performing a transaction internally no longer exceeds the cost of performing it externally. Most companies have taken this approach purely for operational and cost-cutting reasons. They save money by outsourcing jobs to lower-wage markets. But they miss an important point. In the Internet century, the objective of creating networks is not just to lower costs and make operations more efficient, but to create fundamentally better products. Lots of companies build networks to lower their costs, but fewer do so to transform their products or business model. This is a massive missed opportunity for incumbents in numerous industries, creating a giant opening for new competitors. Twitter is not a technology company. It is a publishing company. Airbnb is a platform for the lodging industry, while Uber is one for personal transportation services. 23andMe is a platform play as well as a consumer service company. For a fee, it will map a customer's personal genetic code. If it aggregates all of that data, it could create a powerful data platform. Pharmaceutical companies, for example, could potentially use 23andMe's data to identify participants in new studies, and when they do, contribute any additional data they create back into the platform. The list goes on. Square for small business payments, Nike FuelBand for physical fitness, Kickstarter for financing, MyFitnessPal for weight loss, Netflix for video entertainment, Spotify for music. These companies assembled existing technology components in new ways to reimagine existing businesses. They set up platforms for customers and partners to interact and use those platforms to create highly differentiated products and services. This model can apply just about anywhere: travel, automobiles, apparel, restaurants, food, retail. There are ways to make products in virtually every industry better as more people use them. This is the difference between 21st and 20th century economies. Whereas the 20th century was dominated by monolithic closed networks, the 21st will be driven by global open ones. There are platform opportunities all around us. The successful leaders are the ones who discover them. Specialize. Another approach is to find ways to specialize. Sometimes the best way to grow a platform is to find a specialty that has the potential to expand. Borrowing an image from an essay by the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, Jim Collins calls the idea of specializing the hedgehog concept. Berlin himself was expounding on a cryptic line from the Greek poet Archilochus. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Collins found that of the firms he analyzed in Good to Great, the great ones were all hedgehogs. Academics have taken Collins to task for concluding that the hedgehog concept must be a key to success, since specializing is a risky strategy that can lead to either great gains or great losses. Nonetheless, we like the hedgehog concept, even if we have no idea what is the one big thing that the hedgehog knows. To grow its search platform in the late 90s, Google focused on one thing: being great at search, which we measured along 5 axes: speed, fast is always better than slow; accuracy, how relevant are the results to the user's query; ease of use, can everyone's grandparents use Google; comprehensiveness, are we searching the entire internet; and freshness, how fresh are the results. The company was so intent on getting users the right answers that Google search results often included links to Yahoo, AltaVista, and Ask Jeeves at the bottom of the page, so users could easily try those sites if they didn't like Google's results. At the time, most competitive sites were intent on becoming portals, multifunctional media sites that catered to a wide variety of interests and needs. Some of these companies, Netscape, Yahoo, America Online, AOL, weren't that interested in search and were happy to cut partnerships with Google to let us handle that task. While Google certainly believed that search was one of the most important applications in the burgeoning internet business, we didn't choose to specialize in that area because our crystal ball told us it would ultimately be more lucrative and impactful than the alternate, more popular portal business model. Rather, we focused on search because it was something we felt we were better at than anyone else. So in those early days of the internet, while these leaders of industry were busy tending to their business of building internet portals, Google's search got better and better at providing great answers for users. Improving Google search also had the beneficial effect of increasing traffic to publishers' sites, since it made it easier for users to find the news, information, and entertainment offered on those sites. This helped spur the migration of more content online. Default to open, not closed. Platforms generally scale more quickly when they are open. Look at the biggest platform of them all, the Internet. In the early 70s, when Vint Cerf and Robert Kahn developed TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, which enabled disparate computer networks, such as the Internet's forefather, ARPANET, to be connected and communicate. They weren't quite sure of the size of the networks they were connecting, or how many there were, so they didn't set an upper limit on the number of networks that could be connected, and in fact decided to let any network connect to any other using their protocol. This singular decision to keep the Internet open, which was not a foregone conclusion at the time, directly led to the remarkable web we use every day. Hal Varian calls the Internet a lab experiment that got loose. Or look again at the classic example of the landline telephone. Conceived as a single application platform, voice communications, growth of the AT&T network in the United States eventually tapered off. There was practically no innovation, and the only growth came from population increases and baby boom teenagers ordering second lines. But then, under government mandate, AT&T opened up its network to new devices and other carriers, and innovation took off. New types of phones, fax machines, data modems, cheap long-distance calling. Remember long-distance call? That was a thing once. All innovations that became possible only after the platform went from closed to open. Another example is the IBM PC, which launched in 1981 with an architecture that allowed software developers and manufacturers to build applications and add-on components, and even their own clone PCs, without paying IBM licensing fees. This decision helped establish the IBM PC as the definitive standard in the emerging microcomputer market, giving a huge boost to a couple of small companies called Microsoft and Intel. It also drew flocks of applications, accessories, and competitive manufacturers into the ecosystem, and ultimately created the dominant computing platform for the next 25 years. None of this would have happened if the PC had been a closed platform. Open can be a rather Rashomon-like term. Different companies will define it in different ways to meet their own objectives. But generally it means sharing more intellectual property, such as software code or research results, adhering to open standards rather than creating your own, and giving customers the freedom to easily exit your platform. This can seem heretical to traditional MBA-style thinking, which dictates that you build up a sustainable competitive advantage over rivals and then close the fortress and defend it with boiling oil and flaming arrows. Like most things heretical, open is terrifying to the establishment mindset. It's a lot easier to compete by locking customers into your nice, closed world than it is by venturing out into the open wild and competing on innovation and merit. With open, you trade control for scale and innovation, and trust that your smart creatives will figure it out. If you are attacking an entrenched incumbent, you can use its very entrenchedness to your advantage. Your porcine competitor is probably feasting at a closed trough, and you can take it on by matching your disruptive product with a disruptive business model. Open can play that part very effectively. It drives innovation into the ecosystem, new features for the platform, new applications from partners, and drives down the cost of complementary components. All of this leads to more value for users and more growth for the new ecosystem, usually at the expense of the incumbent's, presumably closed platform. Look, for example, at how organizations like Khan Academy, Coursera, and Udacity are trying to gain a foothold in the education market. They combine internet-centric technologies, online video, interactive and social tools, with an open business model. Anyone can take any classes for free. That is radically different from how the entrenched incumbents operate, high tuitions to cover a high cost basis. No one can predict which, if any, of these disruptors will grow and thrive, or if some of the more nimble incumbents will fend them off. But what does seem certain is that this combination of technology plus open will lead to a better learning ecosystem that provides, as Khan's mission states, a free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Open also allows you to harness the talents of thousands of people because, as Sun co-founder Bill Joy noted, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. It spurs greater innovation since people don't have to reinvent work that's already been done. and can instead focus on pushing the entire system forward with new inventions. Netflix is a case in point. In 2006, the movie rental company wanted to improve its recommendation algorithm, but internal efforts had plateaued. So they took a previously proprietary data set of 100 million anonymized user movie ratings and published it, while announcing that the first person or team who could use that data to beat the current algorithm's accuracy by at least 10% would win a $1 million prize. Even the contest was open. Netflix reported top teams' progress on a public leaderboard, and within 3 years, a winning solution emerged. There is another less obvious but equally important benefit to open source. Putting all your information online shows that there are no hidden agendas. In software, when we open source code, everyone can see whether or not that code delivers any particular benefit to one company, and if it does, take action to rectify that advantage. Open sourcing something says, in effect, that we are committed to growing a platform, an industry, and an ecosystem as a whole. It lets everyone see that the playing field is level, with no unfair advantages conferred upon any particular player. Removing this suspicion of unfair advantages helps growth. A final thought on defaulting to open is the concept of user freedom, a practice that is the opposite of customer lock-in. Make it easy for customers to leave. At Google, we have a team whose job it is to make it as easy as possible for users to leave us. We want to compete on a level playing field and win users' loyalty based on merit. When customers have low barriers to exit, you have to work to keep them. Default to open, except when. Open is not a moral argument. Defaulting to open is usually the best way to drive innovation and lower costs in an ecosystem, so view it as another strategic tactic at your disposal. Will going open help you achieve scale and profitability? Open's virtuous halo can help attract smart creatives, mostly because, as the poet once sang, nothing can change the world like a global platform. Well, the poet should have sung that anyway. With a few exceptions, Google defaults to open. And for these exceptions, we are often criticized as being hypocritical, since we preach open in some areas, but then sometimes ignore our own advice. This isn't hypocritical, merely pragmatic. While we generally believe that open is the best strategy, there are certain circumstances where staying closed works as well. When you have a product that is demonstrably better, usually because it is based on strong technical insights, and you are competing in a new, rapidly growing market, you can grow quickly without opening up the platform. This was the case with Google's search and ads engines in our early days. But it is a fairly rare circumstance. Plus, there are situations when open platforms do not work on behalf of users and innovation. Most incumbents who keep their platforms closed employ the argument that opening up their systems will hurt quality. So by keeping their closed platform closed, they are just being good corporate citizens, looking out for the interests of their customers. In some cases, like ours, this argument is actually true. Opening up our search and ads algorithms would severely compromise quality, since there are many parties in the search world who profit from a worse user experience. They don't want users to view and click on the most relevant results and ads. They want users to see and view their results and ads, even if it is a crummier experience for the user. So the search ecosystem is best served, we believe, by keeping secret the algorithms by which we match results to user queries. In 2005, when we bought what was then a small mobile operating system called Android, there was some debate among our management team about whether or not we should keep it open. Andy Rubin and the Android team initially thought it should be closed, but Sergey suggested the opposite. Why not make it open? Keeping Android open would help us scale quickly in the highly fragmented mobile operating system space. so that's what we did. Meanwhile, Apple launched the iPhone, built on a closed iOS, opting for control over scalability. Android stayed open, grew extraordinarily, and helped Google smoothly navigate the platform shift from PC to mobile by giving us a platform that was highly complementary to search. More people online with smartphones means more people searching more often. iOS stayed closed and achieved both massive scale and profitability. From the perspective of a new venture, either path is a win. But keep in mind that Apple's success with the iPhone, just like Google's with search, was based on an unusual set of technical insights that yielded an obviously superior product in a rapidly growing space. If you can achieve that sort of extreme impact with a closed system, then give it a shot. Otherwise, default to open. Don't follow competition. We are constantly amazed by how much business leaders obsess about their competition. When you get in a room with a bunch of senior execs from large companies, their attention can often wander as they check smartphones and think about the rest of their day. But bring up the topic of their competition and suddenly, you'll have everyone's full attention. It's as if once you get to a particular level in an organization, you worry as much about what your competition is doing as how your own organization is performing. At the highest echelons of business, the default mentality is, too often, siege. This fixation leads to a never-ending spiral into mediocrity. Business leaders spend much of their time watching and copying the competition. And when they do finally break away and try something new, they are careful risk-takers, developing only incremental, low-impact changes. Being close to your competition offers comfort. It's like covering tactics in match race sailing, when the lead boat tacks whenever the follower does, to ensure that the follower doesn't go off in a different direction and find stronger wind. Incumbents clump together so that no one finds a fresher breeze elsewhere. But as Larry Page says, how exciting is it to come to work if the best you can do is trounce some other company that does roughly the same thing? If you focus on your competition, you will never deliver anything truly innovative. While you and your competitors are busy fighting over fractions of a market share point, someone else, who doesn't care, will come in and build a new platform that completely changes the game. Larry again. Obviously, we think about competition to some extent, but I feel my job is mostly getting people not to think about our competition. In general, I think there's a tendency for people to think about the things that exist. Our job is to think of the thing you haven't thought of yet, that you really need. And by definition, if our competitors knew that thing, they wouldn't tell it to us or anybody else. This isn't to say you should ignore competition. Competition makes you better. It keeps you sharp. We are all human and subject to complacency, no matter how often we tell ourselves to stay on our toes. Nothing lights a fire like a competitor. When Microsoft launched the Bing search engine in 2009, we were concerned enough to kick off an all-hands-on-deck process to intensify our efforts on search. This planted seeds that led to new features such as Google Instant, search results as you type, and image search. Drag an image into the search box, and Google figures out what it is and uses it as the query. You can draw a line from the launch of Bing to these great new features. As Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spake Zarathustra, you must be proud of your enemy. Then your enemy's successes are also your successes. Be proud of your competitors. Just don't follow them. Eric's notes for a strategy meeting. We have spent countless hours working on strategy with our teams. This is an experience you will get to enjoy at some point once you have gathered a coterie of smart creatives and are ready to write down the fundamentals of your new venture. So when you are on your way to that first strategy jam session, consider these pearls of, we hope, wisdom that we have collected from our own strategy sessions over the years, culled from conference room whiteboards, Post-its stuck on walls, scribbled notes, and emails to ourselves. The right strategy has a beauty to it, a sense of many people and ideas working in concert to succeed. Start by asking, what will be true in 5 years? And work backward. Examine carefully the things you can assert will change quickly, especially factors of production, where technology is exponentially driving down cost curves, or platforms that could emerge. In a 5-year timeline, there are disruptors and opportunities in many markets. What will be the disruptors affecting you? There is now almost perfect market information and broad availability of capital, so you need to win on product and platform. Spend the vast majority of your time thinking about product and platform. When there is disruption in a market, there are 2 possible scenarios. If you are the incumbent, you can acquire, build, or ignore a disruptive challenger. Ignoring the challenger will work for only a short while. If you opt to acquire or build, you must viscerally understand the technical insights and options the challenger will use to attack. If you are the challenger, you need to invent a new product and build a business around it, and understand the tools, business relationships, regulations, and lawsuits, and obstacles incumbents will use to stop you. Consider the role of other players whose incentives can be aligned to help you. Your strategy should include a way you can have people outside the existing business framework, division, company, team, thinking about innovation along with the people inside. Growth matters most. All big successes in the Internet century will embody large platforms that get better and stronger as they grow. Articulate a rough time frame and the end point you want to achieve. Don't use market research and competitive analyses. Slides kill discussion. Get input from everyone in the room. Iteration is the most important part of the strategy. It needs to be very, very fast and always based on learning. Many large, successful companies started with the following. 1. They solved a problem in a novel way. 2. They used that solution to grow and spread quickly. 3. That success was based largely on their products. And the coterie who gather to work on this strategy, choose it wisely. It shouldn't just comprise the people who have been around the longest, or those with the biggest titles. Rather, it should include the best smart creatives, and the ones who will have a good perspective on the changes to come. Talent. Hiring is the most important thing you do. As Jonathan headed over to Mountain View one day in February 2000 to interview with Sergey for the role of product leader at Google, he assumed the meeting was a mere formality. As a senior VP at Excite@Home, he was quite happy in his current job and wasn't sure he wanted to jump ship. But if he did, he fancied himself an expert in online search and advertising, and he came recommended for the job by John Doerr, a partner at Kleiner Perkins and member of the Google and Excite@Home boards. So the job was certainly his for the asking, and Sergey would probably spend the interview time trying to convince him to take it. Then he got to the crowded office on Bayshore Parkway, a stone's throw from 101, and followed Sergey into a conference room. After a few pleasantries, Sergey asked one of his favorite interview questions. "Could you teach me something complicated I don't know?" Jonathan was an economics major at Claremont McKenna and the offspring of a Stanford economist, so after he got over his surprise that he was actually being interviewed, he launched into a whiteboard proof of the economic law that marginal cost bisects average cost at the latter's minimum. From there, he figured he could dazzle Sergey by demonstrating how to use cost and revenue functions to find the optimal point of production and profit by maximizing the firm's output quantities. For economics majors, this passes for pillow talk. He soon realized, as Sergey started fiddling with his rollerblades and looking out the window, that he was failing to address every aspect of the question. He wasn't teaching Sergey anything. The economics law in question wasn't interesting, and, as a math wizard, there was a good chance that Sergey already knew the calculus involved in resolving the economic formulas on the board. Jonathan needed to change tactics now. So he stopped the economics lesson and embarked on a new topic: courtship. It started with an explanation of how to dangle the hook, using Jonathan's method for hooking a first date, with his wife as a case study. He sent her roses and a puzzle. The roses to pique her curiosity about this guy she had never met, and the puzzle to determine if she was smart. She was, but went out with Jonathan anyway. Sergey started paying attention, and Jonathan got the job. Jonathan received an offer to join Google in February 2000, and for a variety of reasons, none of which were even close to smart, he turned it down. When Eric presented another offer 2 years later, in February 2002, Jonathan accepted it. If you asked managers at large companies, what is the single most important thing you do at work, most would reflexively answer, go to meetings. If you persisted, no, not the most boring thing you do at work, the most important, they would probably respond by spouting some of the standard principles they learned in business school, something about devising smart strategies and creating opportunistic synergies to accumulate accretive financial effects in an increasingly competitive market. Now imagine asking the same question of the top sports coaches or general managers. They go to meetings all day too, yet they would probably say the most important thing they do is draft, recruit, or trade for the best players they can. Smart coaches know that no amount of strategy can substitute for talent, and that is as true in business as it is on the field. Scouting is like shaving. If you don't do it every day, it shows. For a manager, the right answer to the question, what is the single most important thing you do at work, is hiring. When Sergey was interviewing Jonathan that day, he wasn't just going through the paces. He was intent on doing a great job. At first, Jonathan chalked this up to the fact that he would be a senior member of the team and would work closely with Sergey. But once he arrived at Google, he realized that the company's leaders pursued interviewing with the same level of intensity for every candidate. It didn't matter if the person would be an entry-level software engineer or a senior executive. Googlers made it a priority to invest the time and energy to ensure they got the best possible people. You would think this level of commitment would be common. But even though most managers get their own positions through the familiar hiring process, resume, phone screen, interviews, more interviews, offer, haggling, more haggling, acceptance. Once hired, they seemingly do everything in their power to avoid being involved in hiring anyone else. Recruiting is for recruiters. Reviewing resumes can be delegated to young associates or someone in human resources. Interviewing is a chore. That feedback form is so long and intimidating that the task of filling it out inevitably slides to late Friday afternoon, by which time the details of the interview have faded into a blur. So interviewers dash off a cursory report and hope that their colleagues do a better job with their interview feedback. The higher up you go in most organizations, the more detached the executives get from the hiring process. The inverse should be true. There's another even more important aspect to hiring well in the Internet century. The traditional hiring model is hierarchical. The hiring manager decides who gets the job, while other members of the team provide their input and senior executives rubber stamp whatever decision the manager makes. The problem with this is that once that person starts at the company, The working model is, or should be, collaborative, with high degrees of freedom and transparency and a disdain for rank. So now a single hiring manager has made a decision that directly impacts numerous teams besides her own. There's another reason that hierarchical hiring doesn't work. Leaders and management book authors often say they hire people smarter than themselves. But in practice, this rarely happens in a hierarchical hiring process. The irrational, let's hire this guy because he's so smart decision usually gets usurped by the more emotional, but then he might be better than me and make me look bad, and then I won't get promoted and my kids will think I'm a loser and my wife will run off with that guy from Pete's Coffee and take my dog and truck decision. In other words, human nature gets in the way. From the outset, Google's founders understood that to consistently hire the best people possible, the model to follow wasn't that of corporate America, but that of academia. Universities usually don't lay professors off, so they invest a lot of time in getting faculty hiring and promotion right, normally using committees. This is why we believe that hiring should be peer-based, not hierarchical, with decisions made by committees, and it should be focused on bringing the best possible people into the company, even if their experience might not match one of the open roles. Eric hired Sheryl Sandberg, even though he didn't have a job for her. It didn't take long for her to assume the task of building our small business sales team, a role that didn't formally exist until she helped create it. Of course, Sheryl later left us and became COO of Facebook and a best-selling author. When you hire smart creatives, some of them eventually smartly create opportunities for themselves outside the company. More on that later in the chapter. In a peer-based hiring process, the emphasis is on people, not organization. The smart creatives matter more than the role. The company matters more than the manager. Our people are our most important asset, is a well-worn cliche. But building a team of smart creatives that lives up to that statement requires more than just saying the words. You need to change how the members of the team are hired. The nice thing about these changes is that anyone can make them. Some of the culture recommendations that we made in the earlier chapter may be challenging for ongoing companies to adopt. But anyone can change how they hire. The not-so-nice thing is that hiring well takes a lot of work and time. But it is the best investment you can make. The herd effect. A workforce of great people not only does great work, it attracts more great people. The best workers are like a herd. They tend to follow each other. Get a few of them, and you're guaranteed that a bunch more will follow. Google is renowned for its fabulous amenities, but most of our smart creatives weren't drawn to us because of our free lunches, subsidized massages, green pastures, or dog-friendly offices. They came because they wanted to work with the best smart creatives. This herd effect can cut both ways. While A's tend to hire A's, B's hire not just B's, but C's and D's too. So if you compromise standards or make a mistake and hire a B, pretty soon you'll have B's, C's, and even D's in your company. And regardless of whether it works to the benefit or detriment of the company, the herd effect is more powerful when the employees are smart creatives and the company is new. In that case, each person's relative importance is magnified. Early employees are more conspicuous. Also, when you put great people with great people, you create an environment where they will share ideas and work on them. This is always true, but particularly in an early-stage environment. A positive people herd effect can be orchestrated. You're brilliant, we're hiring. The phrase adorning Google's early ads recruiting new employees was a clever Marxist trick. Not Carl, Groucho, since it was designed to inspire a response along the lines of, yes, I do want to belong to this club that wants me as a member. The intent was to let the world know that we set the hiring bar quite high, and rather than dissuading applicants, this became a recruiting tool in itself. Jonathan used to keep a stack of resumes of the people he had hired in his desk, and when he was trying to close a candidate, he'd hand over the resumes and show the person the team she'd be joining. These weren't just a cherry-picked group of Jonathan's best hires. They were the entire set. That was a club our smart creative Grouchos usually wanted to join. So set the bar high from the very beginning and then shout it from the rafters. This is especially important for product people because they can have such a big impact. Pay close attention to hiring them. And when your process guarantees excellence at the product core of the company, it will spill over to every other team as well. The objective is to create a hiring culture that resists the siren song of compromise, a song that only gets louder amidst the chaotic whirlwind of hypergrowth. Passionate people don't use the word. A fine marker of smart creatives is passion. They care. So how do you figure out if a person is truly passionate, since truly passionate people don't often use the P word? In our experience, a lot of job candidates have figured out that passion is a sought-after trait. When someone begins a sentence with the conspicuously obvious phrase, "I'm passionate about," and then proceeds to talk about something generic like travel, football, or family, that's a red flag that maybe his only true passion is for conspicuously throwing the word passion around a lot during interviews. Passionate people don't wear their passion on their sleeves. They have it in their hearts. They live it. Passion is more than resume deep because its hallmarks, persistence, grit, seriousness, all-encompassing absorption, cannot be gauged from a checklist. Nor is it always synonymous with success. If someone is truly passionate about something, they'll do it for a long time, even if they aren't at first successful. Failure is often part of the deal. This is one reason we value athletes, because sports teach how to rebound from loss, or at least give you plenty of opportunities to do so. The passionate person will often talk at length, aka ramble, about his pursuits. This pursuit can be professional. In our world, perfecting search is a great example of something people can spend an entire career on and still find challenging and engaging every day. But it can also be a hobby. Andy Rubin, who started Android, loves robots and is now spearheading Google's nascent efforts in that area. Wayne Rosing, Google's first head of engineering, loves telescopes. Captain Eric loves planes and flying, and telling stories of flying planes. More often than not, these seemingly extracurricular passions can yield direct benefits to a company. Android's Great Sky Map is an astronomy application that turns a phone into a star chart. It was built by a team of Googlers in their spare time, what we call 20% time. More on that later. Not because they loved to program computers, but because they were enthusiastic amateur astronomers. SkyMap was developed at Google and launched in 2009. The code was converted to open source in 2012. We have been just as impressed by one candidate who studied Sanskrit and another who loved restoring old pinball machines. Their deep interest made them more interesting, which is why in an interview context our philosophy is not, don't get them started. When it comes to the things they care most about, we want to get them started. Once they start, listen very carefully. Pay attention to how they are passionate. For example, athletes can be quite passionate, but do you want the triathlete or ultramarathoner who pursues his craft all alone, or someone who trains with a group? Is the athlete solo or social, exclusive or inclusive? When people are talking about their professional experience, They know the right answers to these questions. Most people don't like a loner in the work environment. But when you get people talking about their passions, the guard usually comes down, and you gain more insight into their personalities. Hire learning animals. Think about your employees. Which of them can you honestly say are smarter than you? Who among them would you not want to face across a chessboard, on Jeopardy, or in a crossword puzzle duel? The adage is to always hire people who are smarter than you. How well do you follow it? This adage still holds true, but not for the obvious reasons. Of course, smart people know a lot and can therefore accomplish more than others less gifted, but hire them not for the knowledge they possess, but for the things they don't yet know. Ray Kurzweil said that information technology is growing exponentially, and our intuition about the future is not exponential. It's linear. In our experience, raw brain power is the starting point for any exponential thinker. Intelligence is the best indicator of a person's ability to handle change. It is not, however, the only ingredient. We know plenty of very bright people who, when faced with the roller coaster of change, will choose the familiar spinning teacups ride instead. They would rather avoid all those gut-wrenching lurches. In other words, reality. Henry Ford said that anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. The greatest thing in life is to keep your mind young. As is usually the case with aphorisms attributed to Ford, we can't be certain it was he who said this. Our ideal candidates are the ones who prefer roller coasters, the ones who keep learning. These learning animals have the smarts to handle massive change and the character to love it. Psychologist Carol Dweck has another term for it. She calls it a growth mindset. At least that's what she calls it when talking with non-academics. The term she's used in her research is that these people have an incremental theory of intelligence, personality, or other positive qualities. If you believe that the qualities defining you are carved in stone, you will be stuck trying to prove them over and over again, regardless of the circumstances. But if you have a growth mindset, you believe the qualities that define you can be modified and cultivated through effort. You can change yourself. You can adapt. In fact, you are more comfortable and do better when you are forced to do so. Dweck's experiments show that your mindset can set in motion a whole chain of thoughts and behaviors. If you think your abilities are fixed, you'll set for yourself what she calls performance goals to maintain that self-image. But if you have a growth mindset, you'll set learning goals, goals that will drive you to take risks without worrying so much about how, for example, a dumb question or a wrong answer will make you look. You won't care because you're a learning animal, and in the long run, you'll learn more and scale greater heights. Learning animals also have a related quality, a combination of passion and perseverance, that psychologists call grit. The psychologist Angela Duckworth and colleagues have found that grittier people are more willing to persevere despite setbacks and temptations, and, as a result, go further toward long-term goals like college graduation, placing high in the National Spelling Bee, and success in West Point's Beast Barracks training program. Most people, when they are hiring for a role, look for people who have excelled in that role before. This is not how you find a learning animal. Peruse virtually any job listing, and one of the top criteria for a position will be relevant experience. If the job is for chief widget designer, it's a given that high on the list of requirements will be 5 to 10 years of widget design and a degree from Widget U. Favoring specialization over intelligence is exactly wrong, especially in high tech. The world is changing so fast across every industry and endeavor that it's a given The role for which you're hiring is going to change. Yesterday's widget will be obsolete tomorrow, and hiring a specialist in such a dynamic environment can backfire. A specialist brings an inherent bias to solving problems that spawns from the very expertise that is his putative advantage, and may be threatened by a new type of solution that requires new expertise. A smart generalist doesn't have bias, so is free to survey the wide range of solutions and gravitate to the best one. Finding learning animals can be a challenge. Jonathan's modus operandi is to ask candidates to reflect on a past mistake. In the early 2000s, he used to ask candidates, "What big trend did you miss about the Internet in 1996? What did you get right, and what did you get wrong?" It's a deceptively tricky question. It makes candidates define what they expected, link it to what they observed, explore the revelations, and forces them to admit a mistake, and not in the lame, "my biggest weakness is that I'm a perfectionist" sort of way. It's impossible to fake the answer. The question can be adapted to any big events of the recent past. The point is not to see if someone was prescient, but rather how she evolved her thinking and learned from her mistakes. Few people answer this question well, but when they do, it's a great indication that you're talking to a learning animal. Of course, they could just come out and tell you, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." That's what Albert Einstein claimed, and we would have hired him in an instant, despite his use of the P word. Devising the theory of relativity trumps that. Once you hire those learning animals, keep learning them. Perhaps starting with some basics of grammar. Create opportunities for every employee to be constantly learning new things, even skills and experiences that aren't directly beneficial to the company, and then expect them to use them. This won't be challenging for true learning animals, who will gladly avail themselves of training and other opportunities. But keep an eye on the people who don't. Perhaps they aren't quite the learning animals you thought they were. The LAX test. So passion is crucial in a potential hire, as is intelligence and a learning animal mindset. Another crucial quality is character. We mean not only someone who treats others well and can be trusted, but who is also well-rounded and engaged with the world, someone who is interesting. Judging character during the interview process used to be fairly easy, since job interviews often included lunch or dinner at a restaurant, and perhaps a drink or two, Mad Men style. Such a venue allowed the hiring executive to observe how the candidate comported himself as a civilian. What happens when he lets his guard down? How does he treat the waiter and bartender? Great people treat others well, regardless of standing or sobriety. Today, you usually don't get to get candidates drunk, so you need to be more observant, especially during the before and after spaces of the interview. Jonathan interviewed for a job at a big consulting firm, his second year in business school. His competition for the position was a fortunate and highly pedigreed fellow. Jonathan is sure his name was Hodsworth Bodsworth III, who was not only far more qualified than Jonathan, but better looking, too. Jonathan was certainly doomed. Bodsworth was bound to get the job. But while Jonathan waited for his interview to start, he chatted with the administrative assistant and learned she was planning a trip to California, his home state. Soon, he was giving her travel advice and recommending sights to see. When the firm called the next day to discuss an offer, he figured that either there was a mistake or two people were getting hired. But no, Bodsworth didn't get hired because, according to the interviewer, he was an asshole to my secretary, and she likes you. We usually ask our assistants what they think of candidates and listen to their response. Call it the Bodsworth rule. As important as character, though, is whether or not a candidate is interesting. Imagine being stuck at an airport for 6 hours with a colleague. Eric always chooses LAX for maximum discomfort, although Atlanta or London will do in a pinch. Would you be able to pass the time in a good conversation with him? Would it be time well spent, or would you quickly find yourself rummaging through your carry-on for your tablet so you can read your latest email or the news or anything to avoid having to talk to this dull person? TV star Tina Fey has her own version of the LAX test, which she credits to Saturday Night Live producer Lorne Michaels. Don't hire anyone that you wouldn't want to run into by the bathrooms at 3 a.m, because you're going to be in the office all night. We institutionalized the LAX test by making googliness one of 4 standard sections, along with general cognitive ability, role-related knowledge, and leadership experience on our interview feedback form. This includes ambition and drive, team orientation, service orientation, listening and communication skills, bias to action, effectiveness, interpersonal skills, creativity, and integrity. Larry and Sergey took the LAX test one step further when they were looking for a CEO. They took candidates away for a weekend. Eric played it a bit more conservatively. Look, guys, I don't need to go to Burning Man with you. How about dinner? Insight that can't be taught. A person who passes the LAX/googliness/3 a.m. in the SNL bathroom test has to be someone you could have an interesting conversation with and respect. However, he or she is not necessarily someone you have to like. Imagine that person with whom you are stuck at LAX has nothing in common with you, and in fact represents the polar opposite of wherever you stand on the political spectrum. Yet if this person is your equal or more in intellect, creativity, and these factors we call googliness, the two of you would still have a provocative conversation, and your company will be better off having the both of you on the same team. You often hear people say they only want to work with, or elect as president, someone they would want to have a beer with. Truth be told, some of our most effective colleagues are people we most definitely would not want to have a beer with. In a few rare instances, they are people we would rather pour a beer on. You must work with people you don't like, because a workforce comprised of people who are all best office buddies can be homogeneous, and homogeneity in an organization breeds failure. A multiplicity of viewpoints, aka diversity, is your best defense against myopia. We could go off on a politically correct tangent on how hiring a workforce that is diverse in terms of race, sexual orientation, physical challenges, and anything else that makes people different is the right thing to do, which it is. But from a strictly corporate point of view, diversity in hiring is even more emphatically the right thing to do. People from different backgrounds see the world differently. Women and men, whites and blacks, Jews and Muslims, Catholics and Protestants, veterans and civilians, gays and straights, Latinos and Europeans, Klingons and Romulans. We draw the line at the Borg since being assimilated doesn't promote diversity. Asians and Africans, wheelchair-bound and able-bodied. These differences of perspective generate insights that can't be taught. When you bring them together in a work environment, they integrate to create a broader perspective that is priceless. Scholars have actually tried to determine the value of diversity. For example, in a study of a sample of for-profit businesses, the sociologist Cedric Herring found an association between racial diversity and increased sales revenue, more customers, greater market share, and greater relative profits. He also found an association between some of these markers of financial performance and gender diversity. Other scholars, however, point out that diversity creates conflict among coworkers. But in our experience, conflict is a good thing, usually leading to more thoughtful decisions. Great talent often doesn't look and act like you. When you go into that interview, check your biases at the door and focus on whether or not the person has the passion, intellect, and character to succeed and excel. Easier said than done. which is why Google invested in training its employees to spot their own unconscious biases. The same goes for managing people once they join you. Just like hiring, managing performance should be driven by data, with the sole objective of creating a meritocracy. You cannot be gender, race, and colorblind by fiat. You need to create empirical, objective methods to measure people. Then, the best will thrive, regardless of where they're from and what they look like.